Our first caller today is John, calling from Corvallis, Oregon. John, welcome to The Narrow Path. Thanks for calling.
Hi, thanks for having me today. We spoke last week, and just to kind of introduce myself or reintroduce myself to the listeners. My name is John Perry. I'm not religious, but I'm not here to attack religion. That's not one of the things that I do. I am here to promote science, and the message that I have is that science is for everyone. It's for Christians, it's for Muslims, it's for atheists, and it's for Hindus. And that, I think you and I are on the same page with that. Last week, when we discussed a little bit about creation, you had said that you're under the impression that the creation of life on Earth was a supernatural event which can't be properly explored through science. Is that a fair kind of summary of what you believe on that?
Yeah, I think it is.
My question, kind of a two-part question, is what does the word supernatural mean for you? And then, secondly, when witnessing a strange event like, the tornado that we just saw this week, how can we tell if it was caused by a supernatural force or merely by natural forces which we might not fully understand?
Well, a tornado, we know it's a natural event, and we know the natural laws that cause a tornado to occur. We might not be able to follow the string of events in meteorology, going back as far as things that happened days earlier or weeks earlier that may have contributed to it. For example, like a butterfly wing flapping in Japan. But we do know that when a tornado is occurring, we know that there's certain natural phenomena that are causing it, and they can be explained. If something can be explained naturally, then it at least has a natural explanation, obviously. But some things cannot be. The origin of consciousness, the origin of information, the origin of life are things that cannot be from non-life, from non-consciousness. Those cannot be explained naturally.
There are actually some of those can, and some of those aren't. We haven't fully figured them out. But to say that something is supernatural and that it can't be explained in my opinion, that's not scientific. That's anti-scientific. That's saying this can't be explained. So stop.
No, it's not a scientific explanation, nor is it an anti-scientific explanation. It's a statement that comes from the assumption that not everything can be explained by science, by natural science. See, natural science is a very limited field of inquiry. It has to do with things you can observe, things that you can repeat and predict, things that you can duplicate multiple times anytime you want to in a laboratory. There are many things that are outside the realm of science. For example, history. History is not part of scientific inquiry. We know about history because of historians writing it. We don't know it because we can go into a laboratory and test it. Many things about moods and feelings and choices that people make are not explicable in terms of laboratory experiments because people can't be predicted. Their actions cannot be predicted completely because of free choice. And therefore, there's psychology, and there's history, and there's science, and there's theology, which explains many things that are beyond the realm of any of those fields. There's more than one discipline, in other words. But to say that the origin of life lies outside the field of science that's not an anti-scientific statement. It's not depriving science of its proper domain. It's just saying that not everything belongs to science domain.
Well, okay, so what does supernatural mean? That's kind of the question.
Okay. Supernatural means it is not reducible to scientific or natural law. That natural law is a predictable pattern of things and can be learned. And once you know the natural laws, you can predict what will happen when you do certain things. If you boil water at 212 degrees Fahrenheit at sea level, you can predict it's going to boil every time. That's because there's a scientific law involved there. But things that are not governed by scientific law or by natural law, I should say, are not natural. They're supernatural. Super means above or outside of nature. So whatever is outside of nature would be either subnatural or supernatural, or some people use the term supranatural, but the point is it's a category other than nature. Nature, for example, cannot create itself. And so nature,
not
I believe, was...
we can figure.
Right. And so I believe that, well, nature, there are no laws of nature that would predict for anything creating itself. Okay? So
not that we have right now. Yeah.
Right, exactly. So, but we do have explanations that do not come from nature. And so there's no reason for us to say, well, we'll reject the supernatural explanations because we hope someday, it may not be our lifetime or our grandchildren's lifetime, we hope someday someone may figure out a natural explanation. Well, if they do, then that would be probably a good way to supplement or rule out the supernatural explanation. In the meantime, though, we have a very good supernatural explanation, which comes from a very good source, and that is from God. So why should we have a problem with that? Why should we insist that that's not good enough?
So this is something that's really important to understand about when we're doing science. So, as I mentioned, science is for everybody. It's for Christians, Muslims, atheists, Jews, everybody.
Right. You're right. There's no need to repeat that. No one disagrees with that. Right.
But when we're doing science, so we all have these different supernatural beliefs that we might bring to the table, that we have in our personal lives, that when we do science, we're just discussing observations and how those observations can be best linked.
Exactly.
So when a Christian comes into the laboratory, if he's suspicious that schizophrenia is caused by supernatural forces and can never be understood, when he steps into the scientific laboratory, if he's studying schizophrenia, he sets that belief aside and he assumes, at least for the moment, that this can be figured out. And it's that assumption, the ability to science assume that all mysteries are solvable.
I know that, and this is why science is narrow-minded. You see, if we say, well, I may believe that schizophrenia has a personal, not a natural law explanation, but a personal explanation. That is, it's not caused by natural laws, it's caused by personal choices. Now, I may be right or wrong about that, but if I go into the laboratory intending and believing I can prove it in the laboratory, then I'm bringing into my study something I don't have the right to bring in. I can go into the laboratory and discover whether it has a natural explanation, but I can't go in there assuming that it does unless I have a certain bigotry against anything outside science. You see, a naturalist is a person who has decided there's nothing except nature. And therefore, of course, they are the ones who will assume that everything has a natural... They will assume that everything has a natural basis. Pardon?
I got to cut you off there. Someone who actually believes that everything has a natural explanation would be a true naturalist. A scientist doesn't have to be a true naturalist, but when a scientist in doing science, they step into the naturalist mindset. So you can believe in supernatural forces, you can believe in God, you can believe in all these different things.
Right.
But when you're doing science, you look for evidence. If you want,
well, right. When you're doing science, what I'm saying is not all inquiry is doing science. Not all inquiry is scientific inquiry. If I want to find out, when I was courting my wife, if I wanted to find out if she loved me or not, there was no laboratory in the world I could go into with test tubes and beakers and so forth to figure that out. I would have to find that out from her behavior and from her words about that. Okay, but that's not science.
You're observing her behavior, which is a scientific process.
No. That's a relational process. See, you see, a scientist like yourself is a reductionist, and reductionism, if it can be justified, is fine. But if it can't be justified, then it's just bigotry. To say, well, everything we do, everything thought we think is a scientific inquiry. No, it isn't. You have to somehow defend that position before I'll accept that. Lots of things I learn from relationships, not from science.
Listen, before you go name calling and calling me a bigot or calling science bigoted, that's
okay. I can wait. Excuse me. I can call that if I want to. I didn't call you a bigot. I said it is bigotry to decide in advance that everything can be explained according to one set of paradigms, and when it can't be, and when there's no reason to believe that.
The only thing that a scientist assumes, well, there might be a couple of things that you have to assume. There are at least two things you have to assume in order to do science. You have to assume that all of us share the same reality because we're trying to explore reality together. So you have to assume that we all share the same reality. And secondly, you have to assume that all mysteries can be solved. This is an assumption. You don't have to believe that in your personal life. You're right. There are other lines of inquiry. But when you are doing science, those are the rules.
Okay. Well, let me say something, John. I'm not here to do science, but I'm not uninterested in what scientists can produce. What I'm not interested in knowing is what a scientist like, say, Richard Dawkins wants to tell me about things that are not in his field, like whether there's a God or not. See, that's a philosophical, not a scientific question. You can't even explore from science whether there's a God or not. Well, you can explore, but the answer's not going to come from science.
You're right. From where we're standing right now, we can't explore whether or not there's a God. People haven't been able to demonstrate that. It might be possible someday. And actually, that's what the Discovery Institute seems to be doing. They're trying to find evidence that there is a God. But yeah, you're right.
Actually, you know what the Discovery Institute is trying to do? The Discovery Institute is trying to decide whether there's evidence of design or not. And of course, if there is evidence for design, then there's got to be some explanation for that. And the God hypothesis would be probably a very reasonable hypothesis. But they're not trying to prove that God exists. They're trying to demonstrate that there's evidence of design, which is something that is a valid scientific question.
Yeah. Now, back to what you were saying with Richard Dawkins, I agree with you 100% that when Richard Dawkins is preaching atheism, he is not doing science. He is preaching atheism. And that is out of the realm of science. He steps out of he takes off his science hat and he puts on this atheist hat and he's preaching atheism. And right. The issues that a lot of Christians have with science, there's this growing hatred of science. I mean, you just called science bigotry. I mean, that's obviously
Excuse me. I did not call science. Excuse me. I'm sorry. I'm going to put you on hold, so I'm not going to let you lie about me like that without me, and then talk over me while I try to clarify. I never said science is bigotry. And if that's the way you represent people you're talking to, you're going to have a hard time making an impression on people that's realistic or good, because I never said science. And I never said one bad thing about science. I said that if a person, now a person isn't science. A person is a personality. And maybe that's something that you're not differentiating. Science is not the same thing as the opinion of scientists. Okay. Science is like mathematics. You can do it well or you can do it poorly. Some things can be explained by science and some things cannot. Just like mathematics. You can do mathematics well. You can do mathematics poorly. You can explain some things by mathematics and you can not explain other things by mathematics. It's the same kind of thing. Now, no one's ever going to criticize mathematics, but someone might criticize the way you're doing your sums. In fact, when I was in school, I got criticized a lot by my teacher by the way I did my math, because I was not very good at math. And some of the things I did had to be shown to be wrong. But that was my math teacher was not criticizing mathematics. He was criticizing the answers I was getting because I was doing math wrongly. Now, what I called bigotry is not science, but I said if a person goes into the laboratory assuming that everything can be explained naturally, that's bigotry. Now, that's not science. If it was science, it wouldn't be bigotry. I'm talking about the fact that a person who is a scientist can be a bigot as well, and some of them are. And so are some Christians. There's lots of bigots. I'm simply identifying bigotry for what it is. When you prejudice yourself and say, I'm going to insist that this conclusion is correct before I explore it, that's bigotry. And that's what a scientist does. If he goes into the laboratory saying, I am assuming that everything can be figured out. Well, you haven't proven that yet, so you're going in there with an assumption, which is really what you should be going in there trying to prove. You don't go in there assuming you can explain it scientifically. You go in there to discover whether you can or not. If you go in already, then you're like, then you're like Dawkins. A person who says, well, there's nothing that can't be explained by science because there's nothing outside of nature. It's like Carl Sagan saying the cosmos is, all there ever was, all there ever will be. That's a religious statement. It's a bigoted statement. He doesn't know that that's true. Nobody knows if that's true or not, but it's certainly not a scientific statement. But that is the kind of statement you have backing up the idea that I believe when I go into the laboratory, I can explain anything naturally. Why? Well, there's no reason to think that unless you think that nature is all there is. Because if there's things that are not in nature, then there's no reason to believe that everything can be explained naturally. Okay, you're back on.
There is. Sorry, what's that?
You've got the mic.
The reason that science has this axiom, this assumption that all things can be explained, is because that's, in the past, in the past, most things were assumed to be supernatural, diseases, storms, etc. So on.
True, many things were.
By assuming that they are not supernatural, by assuming that there is a logical explanation, by assuming they can be figured out, we have figured lots of stuff out. And so that's why that assumption is made. You can be a Christian. I mean, you can even go in there assuming that maybe God might be discoverable through science. But you can be a Christian. You can have spiritual beliefs. You can have supernatural beliefs. But when you are doing science, you step in there assuming these things can be figured out, and that's essential for a scientist to do, because if you don't have that assumption, you just stop. No,
that's not true. That's not true. Most of the great pioneers of science, whether it was Pasteur or Galileo or Copernicus or the greats, Newton. None of these men assumed that everything could be explained scientifically. They all believed in God. They all believed in the supernatural, but they knew that many things could be explained supernaturally. Naturally. But they believed that other things were supernatural. So you don't need to be a good scientist. You don't have to assume that you can prove everything naturally, but you won't be a good scientist unless you think that some things can be proved to be natural. I think that's a good quest. Find out which things can and which things cannot. I believe what scientists have discovered now, though I don't think they'll acknowledge it in many cases, is that the spontaneous arising of life from non-life is one of the things that can't be explained naturally. And there's many good scientists, many of them who are not Christians, who have come out and said, that's basically, it's a category error to say that science can tell how life arose, because life itself is not a physical phenomenon. It is sustained by physical organs, but it is not a physical thing itself. Life is something that belongs to another category. You can't put all the right chemicals in the test tube and send a charge through it and get really life.
Life is an emergent property. It is a real thing. It is not chemistry. It is an emergent property. We have, you're right, there are people who say that life can't be explained through science. But once we explain it, they're going to have to stop saying that.
Well, I'm not going to put my money on it. Yeah, I'm not going to put money on them explaining it. I agree. Some people say, what we have, what the Christian has is a God of the gaps, right? You were talking about this, how that ancient people thought everything was supernatural, but now scientists have proven that a lot of things are not supernatural, and therefore probably nothing is supernatural. Probably everything can be proven to be natural. Well, to my mind, that's a science of the gaps, or an evolution of the gaps. There's many things that, for example, Dawkins would say, we have no idea how life emerged from non-life, but he's very confident that evolution will someday explain it. So he has an evolution of the gaps. He can't show that evolution can produce life. No one can show that, but he's got great faith in it. So in that gap, he sticks evolution. If a Christian says, well, I'm going to stick something more reasonable in there, I'm going to stick an intelligent being in there, then you could say, well, that's a God of the gaps. Okay, well, there are gaps, and you can stick evolution in the gaps, or you can stick God in the gaps. And I guess the question is, which one is a more reasonable assertion? That that living organisms came from a living thing is much more reasonable. It actually fits what we know about science now.
One of the big differences between science and religion is that religion has a story start to finish as to how things happen, and science doesn't have that. And the reason for that is that as a scientist, just like as a child who's learning about the world around him, science is learning about the world around it, starting from where we are and branching outward. So we don't know what the future, way distant into the future, is going to be like. We don't know what the past, way far into the past, was like. But our knowledge is expanding in both directions. I mean, we can slightly predict weather patterns now. We can slightly predict the future. We can slightly predict by looking at the weather today what it was probably like yesterday, even if we weren't there.
Right.
So our knowledge is growing in both directions. But you're right. There are gaps. There are many unknowns. There is uncertainty, which is what the scientist lives with, and it is their goal to try and learn more. That's what a scientist's goal is. And to say that some things are just unknowable is anti-scientific, because that defeats the entire purpose of science.
It's not true. Can you know every historical thing? Hey, let me ask John. Can you know every historical thing that's ever happened?
I cannot.
Okay, then it's unknowable. It's undiscoverable.
Fundamentally unknowable.
It's undiscoverable. Okay, right. And God is okay, but God is not fundamentally unknowable, but He can't be discovered through scientific means. Neither can every historical fact be confirmed through scientific means. But that doesn't mean you can't know it if there's another source of information that isn't scientific, like, let's say, a historian. Let's say you find the journals of somebody who wrote about something that they saw and that happened to them. Well, you would never discover that through science, but you could still know it if you had a reliable source of information about it. So to say there are many things that we don't have such sources of information about, many historical events have gone by unrecorded, and they are by nature unknowable to us by any means. That's not an anti-scientific statement, because it's not a statement about science at all. It's not a statement about science. So to say that there are many things that will never be known by science or discovered by science is not an anti-scientific statement. It's saying there are limits to science, just like there are limits to other fields of study.
Okay, so what I'm hearing from this is that you're defining supernatural as things that are not fundamentally unknowable, but are unknowable to us because of our limitations. Would that be fair?
Well, I would say things that are supernatural are things that cannot subject themselves to a natural explanation. They might be knowable if someone lets us know them, or if we have experience with them. For example, let's take a phenomenon like demon possession. Okay, I'm sure you don't believe in demon possession, but because if demon possession is true, then it's supernatural. Now, that doesn't mean it doesn't mean we can't know that. Well, if a demon is a non-material being, a spirit with powers that are not subject to the laws of nature, and that's exactly what demons are believed to be by all persons who believe in them, then demon possession is a phenomenon that is not caused by natural causes. It's caused by supernatural causes. Now, can we know that? Well, we can't know it from science, certainly. But we could know it some other way.
Not right now. No.
Okay, well, let me just say this. Okay, John, we've been talking a long time, and I just have to say you have unbounded faith. I don't, in science. You see, if you say, well, I believe science will fill all the gaps for me someday, you're attributing to science a power that it has not demonstrated and does not promise to have, but you kind of stick it in there because you got nothing better to do. Well, I've got something better to stick in some of those spots, and that is that God has revealed himself. God has visited this planet. God has left a record of his doings and of much of what he has on his mind. You'll never discover those things from science. You can't discover God with litmus paper or a Geiger counter. God has to reveal himself because he's outside the realm of nature. But he can do that, and he has done that. So God is not unknowable. He's simply undiscoverable by science alone.
And is that because he's hiding himself on purpose from science, or?
Well, no, because science doesn't have the instruments to detect him. He's not made of molecules. Okay, he's not made of molecules, and science will have no ability to detect something that is spiritual, because unless that spiritual thing is reduced to physicality, because that's what science studies nature. Science studies the physical world, and God isn't part of that. So it's not part of what it studies.
Okay, so if there are many forces that science does not currently understand and cannot study, because we don't have the tools, like you said. But that's saying that we don't currently have a way to study it is different than saying that it's unknowable.
I didn't say it was unknowable, John. If you're going to dialogue with me, you're going to have to listen to me before you try to represent what I said. I try to measure my thoughts and say what I really mean. If somebody doesn't know what I said and doesn't listen, then they're not going to be able to answer me intelligently. You apparently are what I would call you're involved in scientism. There are scientists who are not into scientism. Scientism is a religion. It's a belief that science is the ultimate answer to all things because nature is all there is, and science studies nature. And there are things in nature that have not been discovered or explained yet, and science will someday explain them. I believe that's probably true. I believe that most things in nature that are truly natural will probably receive a scientific explanation, and probably a valid one eventually. That we're far from that now, so it remains to be seen if that'll happen. But what I'm saying is that not everything is nature. There is stuff besides nature. There are beings besides nature. And science will never discover them because science doesn't study them. They're not in the realm that science studies. Okay? Now, if you say, well, I don't care what you say, everything's going to be explained by science, well, then you're simply saying, you say the same, you've got a science of the gaps. You say science will explain everything. I could say, well, God explains everything. And how is my position any less rational than yours? Actually, I think God has a lot more explanatory power than science does about a lot of things. And until someone gives me a reason to think otherwise, I think I'll stick with what I believe about that. But I appreciate your call, John, and you can call again sometime, but I've got other calls waiting. I appreciate your call.